What are some of the challenges facing survey research today? First, rising costs. For a well-designed survey with face-to-face sampling and interviewing, costs are close to $1 million for 1,000 to 2,000 interviews. For polling, interviewer costs are a major component of the expense, and even with relatively low wages for interviewers and low benefits, personnel costs drive poll and survey costs. Another problem? Declining response rates. In the 1950s, academic polls routinely reached 85 to 90% response rates. Commercial polls made this harder to calculate, but were also probably in the 75 to 85% range. By the 1980s, though, response rates had fallen to the 70s for academic polls. Now, telephone polls by media or commercial pollsters using live interviewers are likely to have response rates of only 20 to 25%. Academic surveys with longer field periods struggle today to reach a 50% response rate, especially with telephone interviews. Only the huge and hugely expensive government surveys, such as the CPS, still manage response rates of 90% or more. Now, if would-be respondents refuse randomly, then low response rate doesn't mean a bias in the results. But if non-response is related to some variable of interest in the survey, then the non-response can and will bias the results. For example, interest in politics and public affairs is pretty strongly related to willingness to respond to a survey. As a result, polls end up with samples that are more interested and informed than the population as a whole. So if we were trying to measure level of civic engagement, the non-response to contemporary polls would be a significant problem. We'd have to deal with that in the survey design. However, the vote choice between Democrats and Republicans, so far at least, does not seem to correlate with non-response. So polls continue to estimate election outcomes reasonably well. One line of research on non-response has argued that non-response is often due to temporary and idiosyncratic elements. Whether your baby's crying, you're fixing dinner, you're have somewhere to go or something to do. The good news is that as long as that remains the main reason for non-response, it's less likely to be correlated with other things we're particularly interested in. But as in the example of political interest, for political surveys, this means that we systematically get surveys that are too engaged, and therefore we have a difficult time understanding lack of civic engagement, because that lack of civic engagement also leads to non-response. Another challenge to modern polling is changes in telephone technology, such as the rise of cell phones and answering machines, call screening, caller ID. All of these have also contributed to the decrease in response rates, though voter or respondent attitudes also contribute to it. Another, ironically, is the glut of polling that makes good work harder to distinguish from bad, potentially driving out better quality pollsters by cheaper pollsters. The rise of new cheap technology, such as interactive voice response, IVR, lower barriers to entry both financially and intellectually. And this runs the risk of producing so-called pollsters who are using low-quality methods and who also lack the technical training to even begin to compensate for those difficulties through some statistical measures. This may also reduce the quality of the remaining pollsters as they struggle to compete with low-cost alternatives. So those are some of the difficulties facing modern polling, but there's also new opportunities that need to be mentioned. New technology of the internet, for example, potentially allows new survey formats, lower costs, varied stimuli such as ads or other multimedia to be incorporated. fast response times, background information that can be obtained in earlier interviews can then be merged with later interviews. While the sampling problems for the internet are very real, the opportunities there are also huge. In other kinds of interviewing, CAPI and CASI, or ACASI, allow new measures such as response latency or visual displays of scales where respondents move sliders on the screen to measure attitudes. Those kinds of innovations of computer technology that comes into the respondent's household in a face-to-face interview or is provided over the internet through a web-based interview are all innovations that offer new opportunities for measurement and analysis. Another area is the rise of geographic information systems, which makes potential linkages between respondent location and local area social and economic conditions more valuable than ever. Understanding how individuals from a survey behave and fit within a broader geographic environment is something that has been left out of most survey research prior to the modern era, but now we have tools to bring that in more than ever. There are also many innovative uses for repeated interviews and for pooling interviews across different surveys or different interviews of an ongoing survey. Those opportunities allow us to leverage past data collections, pool them with current or updated data, and allow us to estimate trends and change over time better than has ever been the case before. All of these innovations are linked to increased power of statistical analysis and data mining and new technologies, computer-based technologies for data collection. It's worth recognizing that the need for individual level data on attitudes and behavior across a huge range of topics remains as important as ever for understanding social science and for public policy. While some of these data can be collected from public records of some kind, employment records, Social Security records, and so on, social and behavioral science since the 1930s has seen consistently and growing over time that ultimately an awful lot of behavior can only be observed face-to-face or attitudes assessed over the telephone, and that those needs for understanding the attitudinal and behavioral context of social behavior is critical. If we want to address public health problems, if we want to address crime problems, understand the nature of employment and unemployment and the dynamics of that, or if we want to understand political attitudes and how that affects government policy making and election outcomes, surveys, polls of individuals that allow us to measure attitudes and behavior directly from those individuals are as important as ever and are unlikely to go away, even in the face of challenges such as declining response rates and rising interview costs. So that's it for today. We'll pick up on another topic next time.